What a well-behaved crowd already. I once had to do an introduction like this to the Dalai Lama, and I did the introduction. I said, ladies and gentlemen, the Dalai Lama, only he wasn't in the building. And I was at GM Place in Vancouver, and I've ever since learned that until I know someone's on the other side of the door, I don't do the introduction. So, to try entertaining a hockey arena for 30 minutes. I'm not that entertaining. Got lots of coffee? For you know who, it's, time zone better, so, he'll be the perkiest one in the room. Got your cell phones pointed the right way? You're not going to be taking a bunch of selfies? That's my trick. That's what usually happens to me. Thumbs up. Well, thank you for being with us this morning. My name is Kevin Newman. I know you don't care. That's not why you're here. But I am the host of the CTV documentary and investigative program W5, which begins its 52nd season tomorrow with a documentary profiling some of the amazing men and women who will be competing for Canada at these Invictus Games. And it's a very personal documentary for me for a couple of reasons. One is because I spent a little bit of time reporting from Afghanistan during the war, but mostly because soldiers have become friends of mine, and some of the people that we profile in the piece are still friends of mine. And so many of the stories that we hear are about healing and the importance of sport as sort of the final piece in their recovery. And we also heard from many family members at first who were a little bit protective, not sure that their injured loved ones should be bashing themselves in wheelchairs to play rugby or training and pushing their bodies as hard as they do. But eventually realizing that sport could be healing, they embraced the opportunity to let their loved ones test their new limits, to mix it up again with fellow soldiers, but mostly to feel pride in themselves again. And as many of you know, that was an epiphany our honored guest shared this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome His Royal Highness, Prince Henry of Wales. Please be seated. Prince Harry, of course, is the patron of the Invictus Games Foundation. And, sir, we are very honored to have you here today because you have many duties to attend to this week. So we're grateful that you chose to join us for the 4th True Patriot Love Multinational Symposium, and it's focused this year on the impact of injury on the family. A couple of other dignitaries in the hall today: Kevin McGurgan, Britain's excellent and charismatic Consul General here in Toronto. As our representatives of the host country for the next Invictus Games, Michelle Manson, the Deputy High Commissioner for the Commonwealth of Australia, and the Honourable Daniel Tehran, the Minister for Veterans Affairs in Australia. And one more note before we begin. This is all being live streamed, so the benefit of the discussions that we're going to have on the stage here today can be shared outside of the boundaries of this room, and hopefully families who are not fortunate to be here in this room in Toronto will be able to share some of the insights and a lot of the compassion that we're going to be hearing on the stage. So let's begin by welcoming to the stage, please, the founder of the True Patriot Love Foundation and one of the key people who helped Toronto secure these 2017 Invictus Games, Sean Francis.
Thanks, Kevin, and welcome everybody to our symposium. It's amazing to be kicking off the Invictus Games here in Toronto and to be doing it with so many faces that I recognize from around the world. So welcome. I want to thank Scotiabank, our sponsor, for their support for not just this event, but so many events that we do. And I want to welcome, of course, Prince Harry, our patron for the Invictus Games and for supporting the symposium here this morning. Just a little bit of background about True Patriot Love. It's a foundation that supports military causes across Canada. As we all know, Canada got into Afghanistan in 2002, 2003, and saw major combat in circa 2005 to 2010. And one of the things that we hadn't anticipated was the consequences and costs of injury and the impact on the family. And several years ago, I had the opportunity of meeting General Hillier, he's a board member for our Invictus Games here, and he was the commander of all forces in Afghanistan and later the commander of the Canadian military. And we lamented the fact that there was frankly so little philanthropy being done for veteran causes and military family causes in Canada. So we'd all line up on our Highway of Heroes when the caskets were coming home, which was amazing in terms of support, mental and emotional support. But at the end of the day, when that event is over, these families live up with those consequences, obviously permanently. And we really needed to come together as a country to fund all these grassroots programs that mitigate the effects and the costs of this service. So General Hillier challenged me to do something about it, and I then conscripted a group of friends, including our CEO of the True Patriot Love Foundation, and Michael Burns, our CEO of the Invictus Games, to start, we started with a gala dinner, and we raised $2 million. We had 2,000 people in attendance. Prince Charles gave his greetings. We had our Prime Minister. It was really an amazing event for our troops, and in fact, they'd never seen anything like this. Very rarely was there an event for our military that combined people from across sectors and dignitaries and business leaders in such a meaningful way. Well, when you're done with that, then the question is, what's next? And we hadn't anticipated doing more than a dinner, but of course it was so successful. How could we let that fail? So we kept doing it, and that's really what became the True Patriot Love Foundation. And today we do these galas across the country. We run a multitude of other fundraising events. We take veterans on expeditions to right across Canada, but also to the North Pole, to Antarctica, to Mount Everest. We're going back to Nepal in April of this year, and we link them with civilians, and we raise money, and those civilians later become mentors. So we've had tremendous success because of all the support of folks in the room, Scotiabank included, and we've donated $22 million to date for veteran and military family causes across the country in physical rehab, mental health. In 2013, I was in Washington and met our Canadian ambassador, and we again, there's just so much happening in these veteran sectors globally, and we said, why don't we use our embassy there as a host venue to bring together a multitude of nations and talk about veteran issues, and that was the beginning of our True Patriot Love Symposium, and I'm delighted to have it here in Toronto after going to London and Ottawa over the prior years, and so amazing to see so many people here in the presence of you and looking at these issues together. What we're hoping to accomplish is we want to demonstrate the inspiring resiliency with military families and shine a light on the challenges they face. We want to leverage the power and passion associated with the Invictus Games so we can show the important role sport plays in the transition of our wounded warriors. We want to show our military families that they're not alone and they're a priority in the minds of government, military, community, and corporate leaders. So on behalf of True Patriot Love, thank you and welcome. And with this, I want to introduce our another host of ours, James O'Sullivan. In short, he runs everything to do with Scotiabank in Canada. But his background is that he has been with Scotiabank since 1990, has had senior roles in investment banking, M&A, finance, asset management, and most recently ran as an EVP Global Wealth Management. He also sits on the Senate of the 48th Highlanders, which is a very prestigious and renowned reserve regiment, Army Reserve Regiment here in Toronto. So with that, I'd like to welcome James O'Sullivan.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's not your average morning around here at Scotiabank. I want to begin by extending very warm greetings to His Royal Highness Prince Harry. Thank you for being here, for your unwavering support of your fellow veterans. And on behalf of Scotiabank, I want to wish you and all of the Invictus athletes the very best for the games that are upcoming. I also want to welcome all of those from the True Patriot Love Foundation. For nearly a decade, you've supported Canada's men and women in uniform, as well as the families that stand beside them. Thank you for that, and thank you, Sean, for holding today's symposium. And of course, I especially want to welcome all of our distinguished veterans and their families. The great advantages we enjoy are not ours by coincidence or by right. It has been said that freedom is never free. Indeed, we must remember that our freedom has been hard-earned by the courage and the determination of our brave soldiers. Of course, those who stand on guard for us summon the strength they need for the difficult and dangerous work we ask them to do from the support of their loved ones back home. And so, whether you fought on the front line, in harm's way, or kept fires burning at home, you have our profound respect and deepest gratitude. Scotiabank is honored to be sponsoring this symposium. Here at the bank, we believe it is not only our responsibility, but our privilege to care for our military heroes and their families. That's why we partner with groups like True Patriot Love and the Vimy Foundation. And it's why we're proud to support reservists across Canada. We're grateful for all that our men and women in uniform do to keep us safe and free, and we will continue to do everything we can to keep them healthy and strong. Once again, thank you all for being here. I wish you a productive symposium and a very successful and exciting Invictus Games. Thank you.
So one of the things I know that Your Royal Highness insists on when any city like Toronto is granted the Invictus Games is that the experience of this next week is as rewarding for the families of our soldiers as it is for the soldiers themselves, which underscores, sir, I think your deep understanding of the nature of recovery, that the wounded draw strength from their families who then need support themselves as they make the massive adjustments to their lives and what their expectations of it were. So that's the focus of our first panel, which brings together past Invictus competitors and their families to discuss the impact of the games on their recovery and their relationships. So I'm going to ask the panelists to move to the stage, if you would, as I introduce you. Randy Gavell Hobson joined the United States Army in 2004 and deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005. Medically retired for her injuries in 2010, Randy is an Invictus competitor for Team USA. Her husband, Richard Hobson, actively serves as a drill sergeant, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but they are expecting their first child. From Australia, Karen May is the Executive General Manager for the Repat Foundation, The Road Home. Through her work, Karen advocates for and funds health and well-being research and programs for injured veterans and emergency service personnel and their families. And her husband, Mark Reddy, served in Australia's Army for 16 years, 7 of them on deployments. I hope you're in the room. Come on up. Welcome to Toronto. From the United Kingdom, David Wiseman is the head of Armed Forces Programs for the Royal Foundation of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and Prince Harry. competing in multiple Invictus Games, including as a team captain for Great Britain. In 2016, David won 5 gold and 4 silver medals in swimming. Mike Trotter served in the Canadian Armed Forces in Bosnia and Afghanistan, and in 2008, Mike stepped on a roadside bomb that resulted in the loss of both of his legs and extensive injuries throughout his body. Mike is a proud member of Team Canada for the Invictus Games and will be competing in rowing and cycling. And his wife, Leah Cuff, took an extended leave of absence to help Mike on his road to recovery, including building their barrier-free home. Leah is a team trainer, equipment manager, mechanic, spotter, coach, just about everything. Welcome. And please join me in welcoming the moderator of our discussion, Bronwyn Evans, the founding director and current CEO of the True Patriot Love Foundation.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you all here with us in Toronto. Thank you very much for being here, and I know this is going to be an exciting week for all of you. And I think this is just an absolutely fantastic way to start off this panel, is to have a conversation with the families and the competitors. And for many people, family extends to their network. So their friends, their teammates, it goes beyond those who we're biologically related to or those who we are married to. So I'd like to start where it all started by asking David a question. So David was heavily involved in the first games in London. He was the deputy director of events, and you were also the team captain for the UK in Orlando. So many soldiers say that once they leave the military, they lose that sense of community that they had. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be part of a team again and what that means for people and how it can help with their recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. After injury, you can lose a hell of a lot. They say that with any injury or significant illness, there's always going to be a physical, a social, and a psychological impact to that injury or illness. The physical is often the easiest to see. You might be in pain or you might be impaired. The psychological effect of that pain or the impact of being unable to crack on with the things that you thought you used to be able to do, that psychological impact. And as you say there, the social impact. When you were in the military, you were completely and utterly sort of enveloped in that team environment. Whether you liked it or not, you were part of it.
Yes.
And everything you did was part of a team. Whereas the recovery journey can be quite a lonely place. You're outside of that, of the cap badge which you grew up in, and away from the team that you've been on operations with. It's very individual, and because of its very nature, everyone's injury, everyone's sitting here on the panel today has got a different injury and a different recovery. That journey is going to be bespoke and individual. So you can be forced outside of a team environment. The thing with the Invictus Games and with any sport or activity that you get involved with post-injury is that it brings everyone together into that environment so that you are again working as a team with like-minded people, and you're forced into an environment whereby the atmosphere is positive and everyone's pushing towards the same goal, and that's hugely important.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So Mark, you competed last year in Orlando. Mark, as you know, is from the Australian team, and you're here again supporting actually many of your past teammates and new teammates for Australia. Can you speak to that team aspect a bit too?
Yeah, for sure. It brings a sense of belonging again. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know when I self-discharged, but I had physical injuries and the invisible injuries, but I wanted to self-discharge, and I lost my way. And being part of Invictus, you gain a journey, you gain that sense of belonging, and you come together, like David said, and you're part of a team, you're part of the Australian team or the UK team, but when you compete, and I saw it in Orlando, it just was pivotal to me, and you see everyone just come together again, and it was amazing.
Yeah, and your sport has been cycling, and you said that in your bio, when I read it, you talked about had it not been for cycling, that PTSD could have taken you to a very dark place. So what is the power of sport? Like, what does that mean to you?
Cycling for me was my medication. It saved my life. I had a marriage breakup. I was scared of losing my children. I was in a world I didn't want to be in. I looked at this bike. I mean, look at me. I don't look like a cyclist. Every commanding officer unit I walked into said, "Reedy, you're playing rugby union." I went, "Okay." And I was 50 kilos heavier now. So, you know, I needed something. And I just said, well, I'm going to climb this bike up every hill in South Australia, and I'm not going to walk this bike. And I don't want to be defeated. And that's what I did. And I was telling David before in the room upstairs, I might ride this bike 5 kilometres up a hill and grind, but it's that zone, you get in that zone, and that's what I wanted to do.
And was that helpful in helping you reconnect with family and friends? And
for sure. It's the endorphin, it's clearing that head, getting the demons out and feeling alive again. You know, and I can see the impact even today with the Brady Bunch. We've got a Brady Bunch family. So Karen says, "Mark, you need to go for a ride." And I go, "Oh, okay, I haven't rode a bike for 4 days, so yeah, I need to go for a ride." And the family, it impacts on the family, it does. So, and I come back and I'm all refreshed and let's go do this, let's go do that, you know. And it's the medication, it improves my health and the impact on the family.
That's fantastic. And so Karen, you and Mark have 2 very young children who are here with you from Australia. That's a long way to come. So why was it important to you that you brought your children here to the Games?
Well, I guess we would have loved to have had them last year with us, so we've only got 2 of the 4 with us here this year. The other 2 couldn't take the time off school at the moment. But it's just we wanted them to experience it and to see what we experienced last year. You know, they really, so Mark is stepdad to my 2 that are here today, and they really look up to Mark, and it's that sort of, it gives them that sense of pride too. They you know, saw him striving for those goals and working really hard, and they call it, it's like a mini Olympics, you know, that's the story they tell their friends. And it's fantastic for them to see that drive, and they can't wait to experience the atmosphere as well of all the games and the other athletes that we're going to meet along the way. So
that's great. And David, your children are on their way too, I think, arriving tomorrow with your wife Lucy. Yeah. So what do the Games mean to them?
It's absolutely fantastic, and I think similar to what Karen was saying there, that they can. I think that it's a fantastic example of just sport in general. I think that kids always need to have a positive example of sport. The added advantage of it being adaptive sport and seeing people with all different body types getting involved, and it really doesn't matter. Everyone's competing and succeeding. I think that has added benefits. I'll just build on what Karen was saying. And yes, I think 95% of it is hugely positive, both for the individual and the family. But I think there are things that we can do better, or we can do more for the family. And I think that's why we're here today. I think that's why we're discussing this. But I do think that as us, people like Mark and myself, as we were talking before, it can be, you can get that tunnel vision. I know that Lucy's been a bit of a swimming widow for the past few years, maybe actually, but certainly in the past few months, and same with you with your cycling. We need to be better at recognising, yes, we're in that tunnel, yes, we're going swimming, but not be so blinkered to understand the effect on our partners. Mm-hmm. I know that Lucy has said that all the stuff I've been doing with Invictus or mountaineering before, she actually finds it difficult for her own self-esteem then, because I'm going off, I'm swimming, or I'm climbing that mountain, or I'm doing all these different things, but and she's supportive of that, and she thinks it's fantastic. But having spoken to Lucy and a few other wives, they're saying, when's it our turn? When's it my turn?
Yes.
They've given up so much in their own personal identities. My wife was pregnant when I was shot. She gave up work. We were living in Germany. She's had to move back to England, and she just followed me around and basically been wife of for the past few years. And I've heard this from other ladies as well. When's it their time to have something that they're proud of, that they have built themselves, instead of just being an add-on to? And I think that's what we're talking about today, and it's fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah. And some of the panelists later on in the afternoon are going to be speaking to things like caregiver fatigue and the challenges that spouses do face. Yes, yeah. Thank you. So Mike and Leah, you have been part of the True Patriot Love Foundation since our beginning. Yes. The first time I met you actually was in 2012, and it was just after you had completed a retrofit of your home. And I know that you've had a challenging journey, but also a very fulfilling one. You've both done quite a bit of work to support our military and veteran families in various ways, which is absolutely fantastic. Mike, this is the first time you are competing in the games. How do these games fit into your journey?
They fit into the journey. I mean, it's completely about my whole life now. Where before, for the longest time, I was actually a prisoner in my house because of the extensive injuries that I had sustained. So I couldn't actually compete or do anything. My whole life was just wrapped around medical appointments, and that was it. So when the Invictus Games actually got presented to me, it opened up my world. It presented me with different opportunities. It presented me with the ability to carry on as a soldier and be essentially all that it could be. It doesn't matter the fact that I'm a double leg amputee. It doesn't matter the fact that I'm missing all kinds of muscle and I have broken arms and broken fingers and broken hands. I'm still part of the team, and that's what matters, and I'm really happy to be here representing Canada.
That's great, and you were telling me this morning that you just had some surgery, so they had to change your classification for rowing. It's great that the games can be so nimble in that way, and good for you for pushing through it and being here.
Thanks. Really, actually, for rowing, I really fit into like all kinds of different categories because of my injuries. I have every injury you can imagine in the world, so so when I went to get categorized, they're like, "Oh my God, you fit into this and this and this." And after they spoke to me, and they actually essentially worked it out amongst themselves, and they categorized me where I think I will excel, and I'm very happy to be there.
Well, that's wonderful. We're so pleased to have you here participating in the games. Leah, can you talk a little bit about how Mike's injuries have impacted you and your family?
Well, my father was actually with me the night that I got the phone call. So he's been there since the beginning. So my dad actually ended up moving in with us just to help with just the regular everyday things, being home, just taking care of the dogs, the house, making sure things are being done while we're running back and forth to Ottawa. Mike spent 14 months in the hospital before he discharged to come home. So I got an apartment down there. I'd come home once a week just to make sure things were still holding together. And during the 14 months, redesigned and planned the construction of a new barrier-free home because Mike couldn't come home to the house we were in. I ended up taking a leave of absence from my employment at the time for almost over 2 years, actually. Wow. And then when Mike, after his recovery, he found his plateau, so he kind of stayed in this one, he had his mobility, and I mean, it was always a struggle, but he stayed in this he didn't decrease his progress. So I decided to go back out into the workforce. My dad still being there and available for appointments and other things, because it was still a weekly thing. I ended up getting a full-time position with Toyota Canada. And then recently, with his most recent surgeries, we planned for the first surgery, and then there were complications with that, so that led into a second surgery, which sent him back almost 2 years.
Wow.
So again, my father had to kick in, retired.
Yeah.
I had to take another leave of absence from my employment just to make myself available to be there for his recovery and rehab. 2 winters in the house came and went for healing, and then the Invictus Games came up. And since that, he also released in May. So this last year and a half has been overwhelming with being stuck in the home, weight gain, all these things, and even the mental side of things, because Mike focuses daily on the physical because it's the most prominent injury. Getting up out of bed every morning, he's reminded, he can't just get up and go. But being stuck and bedridden for a while, like, things sort of changed a little bit. It gave him the time to actually think about everything that's happened, not being able to get up and go and do anything, right? So we had to kind of change our routines a little bit and do things sort of a little bit differently just to kind of keep him in a good place. And like I said, the Invictus Games came up, the opportunity, being selected for Team Canada. He took it very seriously. As I mentioned, releasing in May, he gets to wear the maple leaf again. He gets to feel part of a team again. It gives him a goal, a purpose. He lost 50 pounds training. He's very dedicated. It's actually turned everything around for us. Yeah.
That's so nice to hear.
Yeah.
So inspirational. Yeah. Yeah. So Mike, you nominated Leah for CTV's Most Amazing Person Award, which maybe makes you the most amazing husband. My husband's in the audience, so I shouldn't say that. But can you tell us why you did that?
Well, because she's the most amazing person, at least in my life. No, in all honesty, Leah really does everything for me in every aspect that I can imagine. So when she's sitting here and telling you her side of the story, it's true. I mean, I can't really do anything in my life without somebody's assistance, somebody there to do stuff for me. You got to imagine I can't even put toothpaste onto my toothbrush without Leah to do it for me because my fingers they don't work. So Leah's there to do that. I can't open a can of soup because my fingers don't work. They don't allow me to do that. I can't even go downstairs and train unless I have proper assistance to get into my training equipment. So that's why Leah's there to do that. She really does take over every aspect of my life and make sure she plans every little thing that I do every morning when I get up until I go to bed. Because like I said, every morning I wake up, the war is still there. Every time I go to bed, the war is still there. It didn't disappear. I can't forget about it. And I've only actually even just started dealing with post-traumatic stress and my traumatic brain injury as well from the blast. So that's a whole nother avenue for us to deal with. So now I'm kind of shifting from physical, which will never go away. It's just always going to be that the elephant in the room. And I hate that. I really do hate that. It's terrible. But now we have to deal with the mental side of things. And Leah takes me to all my appointments, which are in Ottawa. So they're about 2 hours from our home. Because I can't get treatment in my hometown. And I'm back and forth to all these different cities constantly. We're always on the road. So quite literally every aspect of my life you can imagine that most people might take for granted. I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't even change the batteries in a remote control. I need Leah to do that. I'm a cyclist and I'm a rower this year, which I love to do, but I still can't actually get into my equipment without her assistance. It just wouldn't be physically possible. So, of course she deserves the best woman in the world.
So Randy, I'm in awe. 4 months pregnant, and you need to tell everybody what you're competing in because the list just goes on and on.
We're 4.5 months now.
4.5 months. 4.5 months. Okay.
I'm competing in rowing, swimming, track, and sitting volleyball.
It's really quite amazing.
The first question, when we first found out we were pregnant, the first question I asked my doctor was, okay, this is really exciting, that's great, can I still go to Canada? been planning on it for a year. So, you know, just because she's around doesn't mean I can't go out and play with my team. So
That's fantastic. Good for you. Good for you. So you developed a passion for adaptive sport beginning at the Warrior Transition Unit in Germany.
Yes, ma'am.
And then you won 2 gold medals at the very first Warrior Games in the United States. So what was it that drove you to sport?
I've been an athlete my whole life. So it's always been an avenue that I could take. Anytime I was stressed out, I could go for a run. Anytime I needed a little peace in my life, I could go for a swim. Swimming is where I find my peace. It's so quiet. You can be swimming your heart out, and in that water, it's the most serene place you could be. And after I was injured, I found my way back to the pool. And in 2010, one of my chain of command, member of my chain of command just said, hey, there's this competition or something going on, and you like to swim. Do you want to do it? And I was stationed in Germany. No one had any idea what it was. They shipped me off to Colorado Springs, and sure enough, it was a little bit bigger than just a swimming thing. It was a week long, and it was exhausting, and it was the pivotal moment of my recovery. I was in a pretty dark place. I was on a lot of medication because at the time, that's what they did for post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. They didn't know what else to do, and then all of a sudden, there was sport back in my life. And I think that was, like I said, the pivotal moment of my recovery was rediscovering who I was as an athlete.
Mm-hmm. And so what are you hoping to get out of the games this week?
So the games for me is so much more about the medals, or it's so much more than the medals. It's never been about winning or losing or beating the person next to you, although that's fantastic. It's never a bad thing to go home with some extra hardware than what you came with, but it's about the people, and it's about seeing the transition of yourself and your teammates and the teammates from other countries that we have come to grow together as a family. There's some athletes who were here as family members last year on another team who are now competitors, and to see them be brought into this, although it seems large, this very small family of athletes is incredible. So for me, it's the experience of growing my family, my athlete family, and introducing my husband and my family to this world. Last year, my mom and my brother came, and it completely changed the relationship that I have with my big brother. And
who's here?
Who's here? Yeah.
Yes.
And my mom just, she's my mom, so she was so excited, and they cheered and they whistled and they screamed and they were so excited about it. But it also gave me another family, and for me, that is the most rewarding part of these games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. So Richard, so you met Randy just 2 years ago,
yes.
And so she was already quite involved in
Yes.
adaptive sports.
Very involved.
Yeah. So how is that part of your story as a couple?
So I've done athletics all my life. Mm-hmm. So and I've seen the results of injuries from war, being in the military myself. Mm-hmm. So seeing how much sports have helped her, before I met her, I never really put 2 and 2 together. Mm-hmm. That sports would coincide with helping people recover from injuries. But now seeing her do it, and meeting all the people I've already met, even being here for only 12 hours, it makes all the sense in the world that, like he was talking about, the camaraderie that comes with the military and in sports, it only makes sense that the two together may not give you the full-blown camaraderie that you're gonna get being in the military, but it's gonna get you damn close, and mm-hmm. It's amazing what people can do when they put their mind to it and they just put everything behind them and they focus on their task at hand. And it's amazing what people can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Randy, so as we talked about, your brother is here, and earlier when we were chatting, he said that he made a really good friend in Australia. So it sounds like the family members are making friends with the. Can you speak to that a little bit and just sort of the power of the games to bring people together in that way?
So closing ceremonies last year, my mom and my brother were just kind of hanging out, just doing the family member thing, just really enjoying and absorbing everything. And this very tall Aussie walked over and said, it wasn't very, but you had a hand in it. Walked over to my brother and said, hey man, we're the same size. Would you like to trade shirts? And my brother goes, there's no way this guy's going to fit in my shirt. There's no way. But, you know, sure enough, they got to talking, and Jace told my brother his story, and they got to be friendly. They traded shirts, and sure enough, they did not fit. Kyle was swimming in his, and Jace looked like he took a 4-year-old shirt from somewhere, and but wore that shirt so proudly. And my brother went to Australia for work a few months later, and they met up, and Jace came to the show my brother was doing. They got to meet families. They went out to dinner. And Kyle, my brother, was walking across the courtyard yesterday and heard someone screaming his name. He's like, there's nobody here that knows me. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, it was Jace. And Jace is here as an athlete this year. Yeah. And I didn't recognize him. When he walked in the restaurant, he is half the person he was, but twice the man, because he is so excited, he is so proud, and he was just elated. He's still a little iffy about the rowing, but it's incredible to see that he was here last year as a family member, struggling with his own demons, and now, even though he may still be struggling, he is here embracing what Invictus is all about. And it was so neat for Kyle, because I kept asking him, have you talked to Jace yet? Have you emailed him? Has he talked to you? Do you even know if he's here? Is he coming? And then he didn't even take 4 hours, and they found each other, and he's here. So we got to meet his daughter last night, and it's just incredible. So the athletes aren't the only ones building a family. The families are also building a family, and with athletes and other family members. It's the coolest thing. It's so neat.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. So Karen, you wear 2 hats, both as a spouse, and you're also the head of the Road Home, the REPAT Foundation in Australia that helps military and veteran families. So from your perspective as a head of that, how do you see injury impacting families?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was really excited, Bronwyn, that the focus this year was on families. Our organisation decided to expand our focus from veterans to include the families a couple of years ago, as we saw, and through our consultations with our key stakeholders in Australia, there was a huge hunger for more knowledge around the impact on families. So we've been able to fund some research into that, some of the first in Australia, which is underway at the moment. The impact, I mean, I have the lived experience from our relationship, which deepens my understanding of the impact on Mark and the impact on our family unit. But I think that then gives me insight in the conversations we have through the families that we work with in our programs. So Mark is a peer leader running active programs, and that involves the families as well. And so I see, we have, after a ride or after a kayaking event, a family day, that sort of thing, the partners and the conversations, it's so important to include the families, the children, and the partners in those programs. It allows them to have that chance to talk to each other. So, sometimes we'll have a little side conversation over here, how are things going, what's happening. And, we can share knowledge about some new opportunities or new resources that we're discovering. And it's that shared experience of coming together in a program where you're perhaps out in the sunshine, the kids are there, it's positive. So, the impact on families is something that we're still learning more and more about, and for children too. What does it mean for them? One of the things that we are trying to implement in our own family is just breaking down the stigma and talking openly about, they know their dad's got this thing called post-traumatic stress, but what does that mean to a child? And they know that, we work with other veterans and other families. So we just try and break that down and have those conversations of what that means. And it's not all negative. It's actually positive. An injury of service means that the individual's got incredible strength, that they've had this incredible life experience, the things they've seen, often a deeper sense of humanity, both good and bad, the things that they've witnessed and seen. So, Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn of how we can use this experience, and there are the impacts and the things that we need to support and manage, but there's also the positive side of what this means, what this experience, what this injury means. So yeah, lots of learning to do.
So you live it, you work it. So what do you do for you then? How do you manage to step away and to look after yourself? So how do you manage that?
Well, funnily enough, I find exercise is my medicine too.
Well,
so I love my hot yoga and running and all that sort of thing. So occasionally get out on a bike ride, and it's we know mechanically and from the research, and we've actually got some PhDs going in this at the moment, that there is that mechanical reaction of the body that you exercise, you're dissipating the cortisol, the stress hormone, and it's also the dopamine of being not just the exercise but the psychosocial element of being out with a group of people, getting out in the sunshine, having a positive experience. All of those things help to lower the impact of stress and help the recovery. So
David was speaking to the notion that sometimes spouses, and many times it's wives in those situations, just because of the way the statistics work, can often feel a bit left behind and isolated. Do you see that in your work as well?
Yeah, definitely. And again, there is that aspect of, for carers, that it is that selflessness and role. Yeah. I guess, though, in my conversations with some of the partners, and you do get that those discussions about is it all worth it, and all of that. But the common theme that I find in talking to the partners is that the men or women that they've chosen as the loves in their lives have a deep character, often a high EQ, the post-traumatic stress, the sensitivity to what they've experienced, the moral injury. There's a depth there of life experience that I wouldn't give up for quids. So, and that's what I hear from the other partners too. But it is about them managing their health as well. So we're looking at some new programs as well that will focus on the partners and the children to help them get some life back for them too, and some focus for them.
That's wonderful. Yes.
We're doing something similar, so let's definitely have a chat after this and into the future with the Endeavour Fund at the Royal Foundation is how we tweak things slightly so that sport is, everyone's still benefiting from this powerful vehicle for recovery that sport is, but just extend that ripple slightly so that it includes the family members as well. Instead of taking the injured party out of the family, giving them an amazing experience and then putting them back in, actually how can we take the whole family along with us? And Invictus is fantastic because it does that. As our host said at the start, as Prince Harry said, when he's building this, when it's a host city, we need to have that. The family have to be included, and that's brilliant. And we need to have that sort of consideration in everything we do, because and just picking up on one of your other points, Karen, which I thought was great, was that when you build that platform around sport, especially as a bloke, it can be quite hard to have those conversations, actually sit down and have those difficult conversations that you were talking about with your wife, let alone with a small child. Whereas if you're kayaking or you're cycling or you're messing around in the garden, actually you can have that parallel conversation to the activity, and it just makes it a bit easier. Yeah. It's not sitting down around the kitchen table and right, we need to talk about this, it's so serious. Yes. Actually, you can do it in parallel to the activity, and I think that's hugely beneficial.
And I'll chime in there. That's what we're doing for the first time this year with the wheelchair sports programs we're doing in our program in the road home. They're bringing the kids out. The veterans are bringing their kids out, so we'll put them in a wheelchair, and they'll play wheelchair basketball. Even Hewan, our little one, and Ben, my son, they'll get out and play. And Ben actually played a game. They said, we want him. Because he plays basketball, really, and normal basketball. And so he played wheelchair basketball, and they said, can we have him? Can we grade him? So getting the kids out into the adaptive sports and just giving them a come and try is amazing. And you know, seeing veterans, I saw one Afghanistan veteran bring his daughter out just as a support person. She was only 7.
Wow.
As a support person.
Yeah.
And I said, do you want to go in the wheelchair? She goes, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just amazing to see that connection, and he had that connection with his daughter, and see them out together. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, one of your roles over the past year has been recruiting people for the Invictus team and convincing people that they can do this.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big. It seems like a big thing, which it is. But part of the point is it's not about picking the best athletes. It's about picking those people who can benefit from Invictus the most. So how do you sell Invictus to people? What do you tell them when you're out there recruiting?
I tell them about my journey and my experience and what I found was pivotal for me. And I go back on the like we talked about, the camaraderie and bringing together and that belonging. And that's what I loved about it the most. Yeah, we're competing, you know, and it's great to bring some extra hardware. I didn't bring any back, by the way. But it's, and the friendships you make with families. You might make friendships with other families. And I've seen it on social media, and I made 80 extra friends on social media, you know, with families and athletes, and it's that connection, and you get that belonging back, you know, and I sell it, and it's more of awareness. I do a bit of an awareness thing, and we have a pathway program now, and we have a great university, and I'll give them a plug, University of South Australia. I think they're here somewhere, and so. And it's fantastic. So, and they get that sense of belonging. They can join that pathway program. But I tell them, don't get Invictus as your only goal.
Yeah.
The goal is to get out, be active again.
Be active.
Get out of the house. You know, it's a social reintegration. You know, it's the sense of belonging, and that's what it's about. And bring your families. You bring your families to these things, the events we run. And the wellbeing program that we have backs it up as well. The peer support and all that. So,
absolutely. Yeah. So Randy, what's it like to be in the presence not only with people from the U.S. military, but from other countries who you've served with post 9/11? How does it feel like to get back together again for Invictus? Explain to people what that's like.
It's overwhelming, but in the most positive sense. It's rewarding because you see athletes who at the games last year didn't even know how to compete in the sports they were competing in, and this year they are flying down the track, or they aren't scared to get in the water. But it's empowering because you know that you were all together somewhere not as positive at one point in your lives. It's fantastic to know that our little piece of the world, the experiences we were having, were actually happening globally. And when you're in the middle of things, it's hard to realize that you are not alone. It's hard to remember that you are not the only one going through a situation. But then you come to London, Orlando, now Canada for the Invictus Games, and you realize that your little world was somebody else's little world, and now you're together, and now you're going through it together, and you're flourishing together. And it helps you remember that this person may be from Afghanistan or Iraq, and when I was in Iraq, I never thought that I would be cheering on a fellow competitor from said country just because of the story that they had, and now you're friends with those people because that's not how you viewed life at that point in time. And now you can't wait to be with those people. You can't wait to be with people from the other countries because your life is no longer just that little spot on the map. It's become a global experience. So to see your teammates from other countries, it's just the most empowering. Probably the most empowering part of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a really nice sort of byproduct, I think, of the games. right?
Absolutely.
Like it's just,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But it mirrors what we were doing in theatre.
Yes.
I was there with the British Army, but I was a mentor and liaison team commander embedded within the Afghan National Army. When I was shot, I was picked up by a US Pedro call sign, and when I was back at Bastion, I was with Danish and Canadian nurses, and it's just like, well, yeah, that's it. We were all fighting, shoulder to shoulder, and so it's all part of the process, and this just mirrors that. And it's fantastic to see those people from the different countries, and that just brings back those memories that of international sort of comradeship.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people forget how closely you were with people from other nations at the time, because when you're in the middle of things, you look to your left and your right, you think it's just your guys, and that's what you've got, and that's all that matters. But then when you go back to think about it, like what you were saying, there were people from every nation that reached out and either did medevacs for you or responded when you were in trouble. You don't really realize that, because when you're in it, you're all in it at the same time. You don't see the different uniforms. You just need to survive. And here, you see the different uniforms, because some people have more colorful uniforms, some people have cooler uniforms. You see the different uniforms, but it's still the same. Everybody is here for you. You're here for everyone else, and it reminds you that, like I said, like that little speck is way larger, is much larger than you ever really realized to begin with.
Can I just say, it's not.
I didn't really realize it until I got here, but like she just said, everybody's fighting the same fight on two completely different fronts. When we're in country, everybody's fighting the common thread of terrorism. When we're here, everybody's fighting the common thread of competition. As much as she's going against the next person head to head, they're on the same team in their recovery efforts together. And it's amazing seeing everybody come together on the same page and fight the same fight.
Absolutely.
Can I just make a really quick point? Is that it's not just the post 9/11 generation. One of the most powerful things I've had in this particular Invictus cycle is training camp a couple of weeks ago. An older boy came over, and he said, he'd been psychologically injured during the Troubles in Northern Ireland in 1982, and he'd been in a horrific bombing. Targeted in a pub in Ballykelly, and he hadn't dealt with that at all until 5 years ago, when he just did a complete backflip and realised he'd been turning his life inside out since 1982, but hadn't dealt with it. But he said, watching you guys at the Invictus Games last year made me pull my finger out and just sign on the dotted line and say, hey, I can do that. But that's from 1982.
Yes,
It's really powerful.
It is very powerful. So, Mike and Leah, so you're staying at the Sheraton in the Athletes Village. So tell me what it was like walking in there for the first time, with seeing all the flags and the big I am in the middle. So what's it like in there right now?
It's amazing. Coming off as a Canadian right away, the only thing that can come to mind is humbling. So last night we were going around and we were actually introducing ourselves and welcome to Canada and all that kind of stuff. And, we may be soldiers who were injured on the battlefield or from psychological events, but we all united together at this event for the Invictus Games. And to see everybody, their camaraderie and just the joy to be there. It's overwhelming. It's truly Canadian just to be like, hey, welcome to Canada and all that kind of stuff. And everybody's. I heard some of the British guys there last night. Constantly, they let me in the elevator and they picked it up just like that. They're like, oh, sorry. Like, there. Welcome to Canada. You're Canadian now. Sorry.
But the energy that's in the building, it's steady, 100%. Steady right now. Every time a team walks in or a team member walks in, they're welcomed. Music is playing. People are.
I hear they have a DJ.
They do have a DJ. Like the energy is amazing. Yeah, it really is. As teams were coming in, people were there cheering with flags and signs and welcoming them home, basically.
So coming out of Invictus, what do you think is going to be the most challenging thing for you, Leah?
For me. I haven't really given it much thought, to be honest with you. I think because of Mike's last year and a half of recovery, like this is his turn right now. And I think whatever he wants to take from Invictus, if it's something that he wants to go into, I know we talked about maybe nationals and things like that, because he's fallen in love with these sports. And it's not going to stop after Invictus. It's definitely going to keep going.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, yeah. So Mark, I'm going to give you the last word, and you can make a pitch for the Australian Games that are happening next year in Australia. So you must be very excited to be hosting the Games there, given your involvement in Orlando, and also you're just so involved right now in trying to bring people into Invictus who so desperately need it. So tell us a little bit about what the feeling is in Australia right now about the Games and what you're hoping to achieve in Australia.
It's exciting. I mean, we're getting the word out. I mean, we're from Adelaide, South Australia, so we're just little old Adelaide. So I know on the East Coast it's exciting. So I'm getting the word out there. It's just... yeah, what can I say? Oh yeah, so they went in my notes. I showed Prince Harry my notes before. You got me off point. So I was inspired by something that was told me by the last Games, and by a wise person, I think. Never give up fighting. Lift everyone around you, and I think that's what the Australian team should be doing. Never give up fighting. And I say that back home in Adelaide. Lift everyone around you. Keep
That's
on
right.
fighting.
Yes.
And those words have stuck in me, and they're true to form. So yeah.
Well, thank you. We're really looking forward to those Games.
Oh,
I
so
mean, we have
am
a
I.
great week coming up, but I'm sure it's going to be some fantastic.
We'll have a strong team, don't worry.
Yes, I'm sure
We've
you will.
got a strong team now,
I'm sure you
but
will.
we have a stronger team. And I'm pretty sure the rugby will be very competitive.
Yeah.
Wheelchair rugby. It won't be like last year.
It's definitely a hot ticket item for
Yes.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you all, and it really means a lot to us that you were willing to open up and share your stories, and because it is, I think, so important that we do focus on the family as part of this. I mean, it's a big part of the point of Invictus. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful week and take time to enjoy it. So thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not attached.
Good morning. My name is Geneviève Bonnet, and I'm a partner at PwC. I lead our public sector practice nationally, but I also have the honor to serve on the board of the True Richard Love Foundation. I graduated from our Royal Military College, and also served in the military as a naval engineering officer for over 7 years, and proudly, my last year was with the British Navy in Plymouth, which was a very interesting experience. I thought the Prince might want to know that. We talked a lot about team and about the sense that you have when you're in the military, and when you leave, you feel very empty. When I left the military, I felt very, very lonely. I had lost my family, and I therefore decided I don't necessarily have to leave them behind. I can be part of the extended military family. And that's the reason why I spend the majority of my time, my volunteer time, helping in any kind of way I can our current, former serving members and their family. PwC Canada is very proud to be involved in this symposium. We also played a role in pulling together the Invictus bid, which is something that started a couple of years ago. So we're feeling pretty excited to be on the eve of something that's real now, that will be very interesting and an experience that I don't think anybody is ever going to forget. I'm going to do a little bit of a commercial for the Australian Games as well. My family is really involved in sailing, so what we've done, also PwC in collaboration with Warrior Sailors and the Royal Canadian Yacht Club, is organized the Showcase of Sailing. So on next Saturday, on the day of the closing ceremony, we will invite all of the athletes and their family to go over to the island at the RCYC and try out sailing, because sailing is going to be part of the Australian Games, so we need to have people who actually know how to do it. So I encourage you to kind of participate in that, and we welcome everyone. So I had originally planned to introduce Senator Elizabeth Doyle. However, she expresses her sincere regrets. She was unable to be here with you today. She's asking that you keep her dear husband, Senator Bob Doyle, in your thoughts and prayers as he has been admitted to the hospital. She sends her warmest wishes and thank all of you for your service to your nation's wounded warrior, veterans, military family, and caregiver. In closing, I will just say good luck to all of the athletes, and most importantly, thank you for all our current, former serving members and their family for their service. Thank you.
About 2 weeks ago, I was in Landstuhl, Germany, at the military hospital there, where wounded veterans from the Afghan war were treated right after their injuries. And I was there with Chris Claude, who's going to be playing on behalf of Canada in wheelchair rugby. His life was saved there, as were so many, but he had no memory of it, of course, because he was so heavily sedated after a Taliban sniper shot a bullet through his neck and cost him the use of his arms and his legs. Someone whose memory of that place is much clearer is his wife, Dina, who rushed to Landstuhl at the time that her husband was in his greatest peril. And if you can imagine for a second the horror for a family member as they get the call, the lonely hours on the airplane as they're flying over to Germany, and then what do you do when you arrive? Where do you stay? Who supports you in those lonely moments? And that's when I was told about the Fisher houses that are within eyeshot of the Landstuhl hospital there. So I went to see them, and they're amazing places. There's meals, comfortable beds, there's support, a place to decompress, so many of those military coins of thanks in the houses there. And as you catch the eyes of the family members who are still there, because it's easy for us to forget that there are still wounded soldiers coming out of Afghanistan and Iraq every day. As you look in the eyes of the families there, you know just how important these kind of private sector initiatives like the Fisher Houses are in serving warriors and their families at the worst time of their lives. So our next panel is moderated by somebody who understands that sector and that piece of the puzzle very well. The panel is called A Warrior Family Odyssey, the role of non-governmental sector in supporting warriors and their families. So please welcome to the stage the panelists and the moderator of it, Colonel Retired Miguel Howe, the April and J. Graham Fellow of the George W. Bush Institute.
Well, good morning. Come on, this is Invictus Games 2017. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Much better. Well, thank you, Kevin, for that kind introduction. I am Miguel Howe, and I serve as the April and J. Graham Fellow at the George W. Bush Institute in Dallas, Texas. And on behalf of President and Mrs. Bush, at the Military Service Initiative, we are focused on fostering a successful transition and reintegration from military service to civilian life for all of our nation's warriors, military veterans, and their family, to include caregivers and survivors. We have 3 programs games really focused on employment and education, but in particular health and well-being. Last year, with the leadership of His Royal Highness Prince Harry, President Bush, and Ken Fisher, we were honored to present the symposium addressing the invisible wounds of war. So I absolutely, Bronwyn, understand and appreciate the challenges of putting on such a tremendous event. So congratulations to you and True Patriot Love, your entire team. Great job on the work, and thanks in advance for everything that's going to come from this today. President and Mrs. Bush asked me to extend their deepest and most sincere appreciation and congratulations to Your Royal Highness Prince Harry, the Invictus Foundation, Invictus Canada 2017, and of course True Patriot Love for your leadership, your advocacy, and your service for our globe's wounded, ill, and injured warriors and their families. For those warriors, whether wounded, ill, injured, or sick, it really is a lifetime journey. It is an odyssey that their family, the extended family that Bronwyn, you and your panel talked about, really accompany them throughout their lives. And so that is the real imperative for all of our respective nations, to include not just our military and our governments, but the full weight of all of our citizens, all of our communities, and the non-governmental sector to be there to provide that support to all of these men and women. And so I'm blessed to have this rock star panel to really take that on, to talk about that odyssey, the impact to family and caregivers, and what our non-governmental partners really do to enable that. So I'd like to ask our panelists just to introduce themselves, starting here at the end, with somebody who might be a little familiar to everybody here in the audience.
Good morning. I'm Ken Fisher. I'm the chairman of the Fisher House Foundation, and I also had the honor of chairing the Invictus Games Orlando 2016.
Mason Heibel, former Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal Officer and caregiver.
And rocking the best socks. They're not Chewbacca, but please check out Colossus.
Getting some Colossus action.
Colossus on Colossus.
I'm Staff Sergeant Elizabeth Marks. I'm a Paralympic swimmer for the U.S. Army World Class Athlete Program, injured in Iraq in 2010, gravely ill in 2014, and now an amputated leg in 2017, and a proud supporter of the Invictus Games and a former teammate of the American team.
Perhaps the most famous Invictus competitor from the United States, a true rock star, and I think everyone is pretty familiar with Ellie's story. And you know, Ellie, that really poignant moment that you had with Prince Harry and that he subsequently had with the staff at Papworth Hospital really is a testament to the broader, wider community and spirit of Invictus. And Invictus truly is a celebration of the service, the sacrifice, the resilience, and the continued leadership and inspiration of our warriors and families and the community that really embraces and support them. And for the millions around the globe, and sir, you're getting amazing coverage on these games. You know, for those watching the triumph of the Invictus spirit, some might take away, wow, these folks are really thriving, and you are. And maybe they think we're all riding off into the proverbial sunset. But it's a little more complicated than that. So, Ellie, can you talk a little bit about your journey as not only as a wounded but also ill and injured warrior?
Yes, I've taken a little more maintenance than most, but the Army's my family, and they wrap their arms around me, and that's wonderful. But we all have these roadblocks and these hiccups. Early in my career, I was injured at 19 years old, and I went through a med board twice. I was found unfit twice. It wasn't until adaptive sports came along that I was finally found fit for duty and retained my MOS. During that time, I stayed at a Fisher House for 4 months of it, and that transition was very scary. I was young. I had no idea what I was doing yet. I had been in the Army for under 2 years when I got injured. And I learned so much from my peers, and I learned so much from my leadership, but the majority of which were retirees and people who had already experienced the lessons learned and been through the pain. After that, when I was found fit for duty and I became an athlete for the U.S. Army, when I did fall ill, it was a completely different situation. The second time I was medevaced again, taking care of the people of Cambridge saved my life. And then I was taken care of at Landstuhl and again at San Antonio, and I stayed in a Fisher House again. And again, I was welcomed into this place that allowed me to be okay and allowed me to begin to heal on a lot of different levels. And I could be that mentor to people, and I could afford them that. But after my injury, that wasn't it. Then I became ill. After my illness, that wasn't it. My body was still failing. I was in a great deal of pain, so much so that I started to lose a lot of weight, and my hair started to fall out, and they kept attributing it to stress. And in reality, it was pain. It was my body's response to the amount of pain I was in. But I don't take pain medication. And because I don't take pain medication, it wasn't always acknowledged that I had true pain. And so finally, leading to surgery on my limb, I was at a Fisher House again, and we're getting ready to leave the Fisher House and do our third transition into what is that new normal. So mine wasn't just getting injured in Iraq or recovering from an illness or recovering from a surgery. It's been all of those things. And along that path, there has been civilians who love us and believe in us and afford us things that we would have never had if it weren't for the Vietnam era shedding light on how hard this is, how many people it takes. If it weren't for people like Prince Harry using their heart and their passion, their celebrity to prop us up and let us be seen for people that usually wouldn't be seen. If it weren't for people like Mason putting his own pain aside and taking care of me when I'm deciding to have my leg cut off. It's such a long process that isn't today and isn't yesterday, it's tomorrow and every day after. And we get to live that. And we're gonna have maintenance surgeries and more limbs to come and more care that needs to be had. And it's really kind of overwhelming sounding because it's so much, but it's a lifelong journey, and we're lucky to have the people beside us that we do.
And so for you, along that pathway, as we were talking previously, really your initial wounds are connected to the subsequent illnesses and then the injuries that led to your amputation. Is that right?
Yes, sir. So my original injury was a bilateral hip injury. We didn't know a lot about it at first. After the surgeries, I was having peripheral issues further in my limbs. Didn't think much of it, had a lot of pain. When I flew to London, they did a lot of tests to find out what was wrong with me. Thought maybe it was a mycoplasmatic bacterium and pneumonia. But just this year, we found out that it was more likely a pulmonary embolism that resulted from one of my previous injuries. And then after being on ECMO, the doctors did a phenomenal job and saved me under circumstances where not a lot of people would have survived. And so I'm very grateful. Please don't ever think that I'm not. But I was still in a great deal of pain because my injuries had been exacerbated. And I was chasing that pain and kind of putting it aside to try to achieve for my brothers and sisters. And finally it came to a place to where we found out that I was having improper perfusion in my limb. And so it was time to make that decision.
And so you talked about, for you, the importance of the support network and structure you had, and not only you, but also your family, whether your brother, your mom and dad, maybe a certain superhero, mutant, but you talked about Fisher House. What has it meant to have Fisher House on your journey, your path? What have they done for you? What has it meant to you and your family?
More than I knew when I was younger. I'm only learning now what all they've done for me. Shame on me. But The easiest way to explain it is to give it some perspective, which is I was 19 years old. I'd been injured. I had invested my heart and my life into being a combat medic. That's what I wanted to be. I was going to be great at it, and now that rug was pulled from under me. My unit still had something to take care of. They were still on mission, and so now I was released to all these strangers. So my comfortable family that they had spoke about earlier was gone, and that was really the only family I'd ever had. And so the Fisher House said, that's okay. We have somewhere for you to stay. We have a community of people for you to be around. And it's more than a room and a bathroom and a kitchen and a refrigerator. It is an environment where you have retired sergeant majors, which me as an E4, substantially lower when I was injured, I would have been terrified to talk to these people. You know, I would have been at parade rest or attention and trying not to talk to these people. And they would approach me and say, what happened? How can we help you? They wanted to educate me. So it wasn't just a room, it was all of these people with years more knowledge than I had in life, affording me options and the want to fight the med board and stay in and become that for someone else. When I came home from London, I got my first taste at getting to be that mentor for other people, and wow, being at the Fisher House, helping other privates and sergeants, staff sergeants learn, you know, what their rights were and what they could fight for and who they could become, and learn about Invictus and why not adaptive sports. And now this time we're finding ourselves doing it all over again. There's people there that don't know. They don't know that there's all these people that love them and care about them. And it's a powerful environment to heal in, because there's nothing more important than having somebody believe in you.
I think that's one of the real powerful things that come out from our conversations is that, you know, people understand, okay, offsetting lodging costs or transportation costs, but really it's about creating an environment or a community. You know, Ken, a lot of people might say, wow, the United States has this huge military, they've got huge Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs programs. Why the Fisher House?
Because, you know, the military does a great many things. The VA does a great many things. They don't do everything. And I think it's important for Americans or anybody really around the world to see a problem and not just point out that problem, but to say, you know what, I can be part of the solution. And that's what it was for my uncle when he created this program. And that's a way of thinking that has been passed down to the generations, and it's going to be passed down again. And that is to be part of the solution. Don't be somebody that just points out a problem. And is there any more deserving group of men and women than those who wear or have worn their nation's uniform? In my mind, I can't think of anything that is more important than supporting them, and especially their families, because of the sacrifices that they make, that only now is really coming to light.
And Ken, maybe folks may not recognize or know this about you, but did you serve in the military?
No, I never wore the uniform. I grew up during the Vietnam War. The men and women that fought in that war were my older brothers and sisters, really. But it did shape a lot of my thinking, and seeing what happened to these men and women when they came home and how they were treated really did shape my thinking. And when it came time for me to kind of assume the leadership of Fisher House, it was done completely and totally with my full mind and my body and my soul, because I really believe in these men and women and what they not only have done, but what they continue to do. And take Vietnam, for instance. We talked about it before, where instead of their bitterness, you know, holding on to that bitterness and retreating, they wanted to make sure that what happened to them wouldn't happen again. And so many of these Vietnam veterans that I've had the good fortune to know and to be able to interact with just amaze me every day in what they continue to do and how they support not only what we're doing, but the other initiatives aimed at helping families and those who are getting treatment today.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Ken. I mean, I think Ellie and I do have at least one thing in common, and that's we're both children of Vietnam veterans. And I think we heard Ellie talk very passionately at the ESPYs and recognize that generation for their service. And I think there's a lesson there for our nation, for all nations, in that there is opportunity to really develop. And you know, this generation of warrior enjoys tremendous support, and I think that's due in large measure to a sense of national guilt and lessons learned on how we didn't in the United States appropriately treat our returning Vietnam warriors, but because, as you talked, Ken, their leadership.
It's because of them that you see or hear today someone in uniform, you hear thank you for your service. That's because of what they did. A good deal of the reason for that is because of the groundwork that was laid by Vietnam veterans. But that's not enough anymore. Thank you for your service is nice. It would have been great for them to hear, but it's not enough anymore. We have to do a better job. We have to do a better job in supporting their families, and we have to do a better job in helping them recover. Not just physically, from that you can see, but from that you can't see, the psychological wounds.
So, Mason, again, besides your affinity for superheroes and mutants, we know that you just told us you're an Army explosive ordnance disposal officer.
Yes, sir.
Just about ready to complete your separation from the Army, I understand.
Yep.
But can you tell us a little bit about your story as a warrior, but also as a non-medical assistant, to use a very bureaucratic U.S. military term, or what I think the rest of us would call a caregiver?
So I served, I originally enlisted in the Alabama National Guard. I decided to finish my collegiate degrees and then commissioned through an ROTC program to go into explosive ordnance disposal, commonly known as like the bomb squad. So it was interesting for sure, long school. As soon as I showed up to my first duty station, I was sent out the door 3 weeks later to Afghanistan. I spent the next 9 months running around the country, weighing on average probably 400 pounds between myself, my kit, my equipment.
I can understand that.
It's a bit exhausting.
Boom.
So due to that and just the intensity of what we were doing, I ended up with some injuries myself. I came back home when we were done with our service over there and began a series of surgeries on my left knee. Before the last surgery, which was the most severe Oates procedure, they removed a chunk of my femur and replaced it with a donor. So I wanted to strengthen that knee. I wanted to make sure that I was in the best shape I could be. And a mutual friend introduced me to Elizabeth. And she got me in the pool. She ran me through my paces. I think I maybe swallowed some vomit 3 or 4 times. Didn't want to make a bad showing. So it kind of blew me away. I found out later the day that she took me to the pool, and it was a Sunday for me. For her, it was an anniversary for her live day. Wow. So she took that time for a complete stranger and put me in the pool, and it was a very positive experience. From that, she trained me while she was training up for Invictus, still making sure to take time out of her schedule for somebody who she just met. I'm eternally grateful, completely impressed daily by her. We communicated through Invictus and maintained a friendship that evolved to something more, and pretty much inseparable since. But with this most recent stay at the Fisher House, which is a phenomenal program establishment, and I thank you greatly for that. It's interesting because you look at her and you look at her accomplishments and you see somebody who's doing so many great things. And then, you know, I wake up and I'm like, man, my back kind of hurts or my knee kind of hurts. It adds a level of perspective that I don't think you would be afforded otherwise. And I think it's a great thing for anybody to see. You know, I'm not going to say that, you know, you might suffer from migraines or you might suffer from arthritis. It's not saying that your injuries are any less substantial than somebody who has, you know, PTSD or limb salvage. It's how you interpret those injuries and how you move forward from that. And she's a great inspiration, and she makes it incredibly easy most of the time to be a caregiver for her. The hardest part is, you know, trying to be that voice in her ear, like, hey, you've been on that leg for like 8 hours, kind of take it easy. Mm-hmm. So it's a fun adventure, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So in addition to having you chum the water a little bit, Ellie kind of also told us a little bit, will you share a little bit about some of the other injuries that you contend with?
Yeah, so I suffer from, some depression, anxiety, and PTSD. It's an interesting duality of life when you have lived one way the majority of your life. And it's fun and it's happy and you get to see an appreciation for life. And then you go to a completely different scenario and you see things. And you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything immoral or illegal. You just had to see things that you see in movies that you don't ever actually have that connection with. And then it becomes personal. It becomes a part of you. And it becomes, you know, every time you look in that mirror, you see what you were before and what you were after. And you've got to find the middle ground that you can be happy with.
Thanks for sharing that, Mason. And so in the truest sense of the word, not only are you a caregiver, a world-class caregiver, but you yourself are a wounded warrior. And if you get a chance to spend any time with these two, you get to see that we actually have 2 wounded warriors and 2 caregivers sitting on this stage who constantly advocate for each other. Can you guys kind of talk a little bit about how that kind of ebb and flow goes from being, you know, shifting roles in that regard?
She's a great teammate. She's, I think the biggest conflict as 2 caregivers and 2 wounded warriors, or just caregivers in general, is you have to be selfless. It happens. But then you also have to know when to be selfish. So that's I think the hardest part, but we're both very open. Communication is such an important part. You know, being honest and understanding what's going on within you as well as what's going on with your partner and being able to address and communicate through that, I think, makes it easier.
So one of the things that I hope folks take away, and those that are watching, is just the extreme diversity of what is family to our warriors, and also what is and who are our caregivers. You know, Senator Dole really tremendously regrets she absolutely would be here if she could today. You know, so she runs one of the most impactful nonprofits in the United States with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, focused exclusively on caregivers because of meeting people like these when she was at Walter Reed Bethesda with her husband, Senator Bob Dole. Recently, the Dole Foundation commissioned a study by the RAND Corporation to really look at the issues of caregivers, military caregivers within the United States. Within the United States, we have 5.5 million caregivers for our military and veteran population, of which 1.1 million are post 9/11 caregivers. And when you look at that population, almost 40% are under the age of 30. So think about that. So a lifetime of care and support to our wounded warriors, but how do we sustain our families over the course of their lives? 75% of them are working in trying to balance and manage finances and career in addition to caregiving duties. And so, Mason, you're kind of going through that right now, right? With working and planning through your transition at the same time you're serving as a caregiver and all of the things that that will come with what's next for you.
Yeah, it's a lot to juggle. Luckily, I got big hands, and I got a great partner. But there's a lot to it. There's so many programs out there for veterans transitioning. I think the hardest part is just getting all of the information out there, making sure that people are there actually interested in making sure somebody has a future after service instead of just justifying a paycheck by giving a PowerPoint presentation. I think there's a lot to be done in that aspect of kind of going through the weeds and leaning it out a little bit to make sure that what's out there is actually a quality product versus a quantity product. And then as far as my future, I have no clue. It's kind of nice though. I know I'm not going to have to shave when I don't want to. I can dress myself daily as I want to.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Well,
team effort.
Just so everyone knows, last night in our conversation, Mr. Fisher was going to show up. What was your plan to wear? He was going to wear flip-flops and no shirt, and you were going to join him with the flip-flops, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that didn't happen.
So I guess I can't dress myself still. But.
That's all right. I can't either.
So, Ellie, this is something that you had talked about as well as in one of the messages that you wanted to make sure that the warrior community understood. And there's a lot of white noise out there in some of the navigation challenges that Mason's talking about.
Right. So there are people who are doing it right. Mr. Fisher's doing it right. Prince Harry is doing it right. And those people have taken on boulders and are moving them by themselves. And if we get behind organizations and people who are doing it right, the Bush Foundation is doing it right, and we all put our efforts in the same place, we're going to move them and we're going to make differences. But if everybody's trying to move their own problem, it's going to go nowhere. And so I think that we have a lot of people who are doing a great job and doing great things for people. But even the stark contrast between my transition and Mason's transition shows us that we're doing things right, but we could do better. I was given a lot of support. My life has been a series of happy accidents. I have fallen into the path of people like Tom Lacrosse, who love and champion us, to people like Mr. Fisher. I mean, and it's just been phenomenal having those people lifting me up when I was falling down. Where Mason had no one, essentially, other than his friends and his brothers in arms. And he didn't know these things existed. He didn't have the support I had. And for all, stereotypical reasons, he should have. I mean, he was an officer and he was a captain. And those people usually have the ability to voice their opinion a little bit easier than an enlisted person would. And he didn't. So people are still slipping through the cracks. And it's our job and our generation's job to pick them up and find them. Just because my father's generation pushed forward, I think Prince Harry's a great example of our generation picking it up and pushing it forward more. We don't need to get comfortable and complacent. This is a forever thing. And I will not disrespect my father's generation by allowing it to backslide whatsoever. So that's...
I got to give that a round of applause right there. So Ken, how do you get to be the wheat?
I'm sorry?
How do you get to be the wheat? Ellie talked about there's a lot of noise out there, and how do you weed through that? What lessons can you share with these leaders here in the room and those watching? How do you get to be a Fisher House? What lessons learned do you have?
For me, it was very simple. I mean, we had to operate this foundation for the long haul, and that meant bringing a certain business approach to it, a for-profit mentality. if you will, so that, we maximize not only what the impact we were having, but we were honoring the people that supported us by spending that dollar wisely. At this point, we spend almost 94 cents on every dollar towards our program services and the things that we offer, which is not just lodging. I mean, we've been able to expand, but in a responsible way. We've expanded in a family way, in family issues. We didn't go where we weren't, where we didn't belong. We stayed in our lane to a certain extent. We offer transportation. We offer scholarships for the children, for those 100% disabled, for spouses. So it's essentially just staying focused on what your mission is, and remembering that the people that donate to you, have a stake in what you're doing. They're your shareholders, and their dividends has to be seen as the metrics, what you are doing, whether it's 72 houses with 30 more coming in the next 5 years, or how many tickets, airline tickets we buy, because caregivers need to go back and forth. The government in the United States only does that one time initially, and if you're not in a combat casualty, sometimes that becomes a gray area as well. In 2013, during the government shutdown, in the United States, death benefits had stopped being paid. That had slipped through the cracks. And for us, it was easy to say, you know what, that's not going to happen. We can't allow that to happen to these men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice in their families. And so within 24 hours, we had mobilized so that we could cover the death benefits for as long as the government had shut down. And that lasted, I think, about a week. There were people know that 5 families had lost a loved one in theater, but actually almost 30 families had lost a loved one in uniform during that period of time. So it's about staying focused. It's about supporting these so deserving men and women and their families, sometimes doing something a little bit outside of your mission, but staying focused on what you really intended to do in the first place.
And so Fisher House has been recognized, going all the way back to 1992, in that model, and the excellence and the efficiency and the focus and the delivery. But you also are able to balance that with a tremendously personal touch. And we heard Ellie and Mason talk about that sense of community that you're able to create through the Fisher House Foundation.
Yeah, a support system has formed within the houses, and that's a byproduct, and they support each other. They share the joy of the good days. They'll share the sorrow of the bad, because not every story has a happy ending. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, and I appreciate the fact that we're dwelling on Fisher House a little bit. It's gratifying, but it's not about me. It's not about Fisher House. It's about them. And it's about their families, and that's what this is about. So as much as I appreciate it, it's a little humbling to have it mentioned the way it is when I'm sitting next to 2 extraordinary people, 2 of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. They're going to build a statue of Ellie in Fort Knox because of all the gold she's won.
No, we're not.
And if we go back to the gold standard, you and I are going to be best friends. And this guy here never ceases to amaze me. Every time I talk to him, I hear him speak. And behind them are family members, and we need to remember that. And so whether it's Fisher House or another foundation, we're here to support, but ultimately it's about family. That is probably the most important word to me that you could ever hear, is family.
So focus, family, clarity of purpose, always putting ourselves second is what I hear clearly from you.
It's not about me. It's not about us. It's about them.
But when I say you, I mean all of us
Yes.
that work in this space. And having the humility to work together. I mean, as you described that example, the U.S. government can't deliver. The private sector, the non-governmental sector can fill a void.
We can't sit back and complain about it. And you know, corporate America, global corporate companies and so forth, they have an obligation to step up and help. They do. And I think it's important. And we're seeing it more and more. And that's also gratifying. But there's still much, much more to be done. Mm-hmm. And I know in America, I think corporations are doing their part. But it's not just about jobs. It's not just about helping a veteran get a job or get a house. That's important. But it's about also the psychological. It's about supporting them and making it easier for them to seek treatment. And by the way, because we've done a great job in removing the stigma associated with coming forward, which is what we wanted the Orlando Games to bring to light, was come forward, seek the treatment that's available for you. It's also up to the government too. You know, so when the stigma is removed, they have to make sure that the stigma is removed on their side as well. So it's not just a one-way side here.
And we're definitely seeing that within the United States on the non-governmental side. So in the follow-up to the symposium last year, the Bush Institute established the Warrior Wellness Alliance. Ms. Casey Kelly is with us here today. She oversees that program directly, but it really ties together best-in-class non-governmental health care providers with large veteran peer-to-peer organizations to connect them to care. And one of the things that's been extremely encouraging to see is all of those providers provide services not only to the warrior, the veteran, but they offer those services to the entire family, and the family as defined by the warrior themselves, which is an evolution that the government is starting to look at, but it's going to take them a little bit longer to do. So let me ask Mason and Ellie, based on what Ken described, and what you've seen going back to 2009, 2010, what needs to happen next in this landscape to better serve not only warriors and support warriors, but caregivers, and the complexity of who caregivers are today? What recommendations do you see to better support your brothers and sisters and families moving forward?
I think that we need to, people who have benefited from it, people who have experienced it, and people who know about it, knowing obligates you to action. And I think that we need to not rely on people to do for us, but to do for ourselves as well. And now that there's so much visibility on the caretaker and so much visibility on the soldiers, it's time for us to acknowledge our caregiver. It's time for us to realize that there's someone outside of ourselves who needs to be taken care of. I think that our government's hands are pretty full right now, and there's a lot in the world. There's a lot. And I would feel selfish to even begin to think that I needed to be a priority. So we need to prioritize ourselves. And for me, the easiest way to do that is by helping other people. Mentoring other soldiers, mentoring other injured people, not just service members, has helped me in more ways than I could have ever imagined. Winning medals is nice. Being on high platforms is nice. But watching other people succeed is magical. I will never be as excited about my gold medal as I will about someone else's fourth place finish. So I don't know how to tell people who are more educated and more invested than I am and what they need to do. All I know is the personal responsibility that I need to take to do for my brothers and sisters. I wouldn't feel comfortable telling other people you need to do. A lot of you have helped me in a lot of ways and educated me and helped me to look outside of myself. And I think that if we all take a little bit of time to love each other and be passionate about each other, it's far more rewarding and powerful than invoking any kind of fear or obligation in one another.
I don't think that you should be obligated. I think you should be passionate. I don't think that you should be scared into action. I think you should act for those that you love.
Mason, I know you're swelling with pride right now, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to follow up. So how do you follow up?
There's no following her up. You just enjoy the show. But
how do you think I feel? I got to follow both of them.
I would think, for me, I would preach empathy and creativity. Empathy on the aspect of, I'll never know what you've gone through, you'll never know what I've gone through, and I'll never know your pain, and you'll never know my pain. But it can be our pain, and it can be our problem to solve together. And I think people get lost on that aspect of, like, well, you know, I have this injury and I have that injury, so that person should just, you know, suck it up and drive on. And I think that's a terrible, terrible, terrible mentality to have, because that's part of that whole, I guess, stigma of being injured, is that people are going to look down on you for it, or they're going to judge you for it. Or I know I personally struggle with just the thought of, you know, I don't belong here. I don't deserve to have these, you know, courtesies and these amenities afforded to me by others. But I know she would argue otherwise. And for creativity, I would implore those who are suffering from either physical or mental injuries to seek new avenues of treatment, new avenues of therapy, not just medicinally, but you know, to nerd out for a second, we go to Dungeons and Dragons, and it's, you interact with strangers, but you have to go through these scenarios and these problems and these challenges with these strangers. And you get a chance to role play, so you can infuse some of your own insecurities or issues into these characters, and it's almost doing it anonymously. So you can kind of subconsciously work through some issues you might not consciously be able to work through at the time. So I would implore people to seek out, you know, non-traditional means. You might find something you thoroughly enjoy.
Thanks, Mason. Ken?
That's tough to follow.
Dungeons and Dragons.
You know, these...
If you didn't hear Ellie, she said Dungeons and Dragons. That's hard to follow.
We're all aware of the issues today, I think, much more so than just a few years ago. But I think it's up to us in this room. I think it's up to people, you know, in all societies that are fortunate enough to have men and women who put a uniform on and go and defend your rights, your right to be free, your right to get up in the morning and go to work, your right to disagree in many cases. But it really is up to us, and it doesn't need to be in the form of a foundation or taking on an Invictus Games or something like that. You know, it starts sometimes with small steps. But I think the most important thing for all of us is to realize that these men and women don't ask for anything. They never have, neither have their families. But it is up to us to repay a debt that, quite frankly, can never be repaid. For me, who never wore the uniform, I mean, I'm just awed by them every day. And I'm so proud of my uncle for getting me involved in this, because I couldn't imagine my life without this. I really couldn't. I think that, you know, every day we hear news about, in the United States, 20 to 22 veterans a day are committing suicide. Whether it's younger veterans, or as we're just learning, older veterans. They're from all age groups, from all demographics. But what they do have in common is they wore the uniform. How could anybody be okay with that? Whether you're government or not. How could anybody in this room or anywhere be okay with that? I get a little passionate about this But for one veteran to commit suicide is one veteran too many. So I think if we collectively can keep these issues alive, keep them in the forefront, that's a good step forward in repaying that debt.
I told you that we had the rock star panel. We could go out all day long, but then I know the challenges, Bronwyn, of
We'd
a panel.
miss Springsteen.
We'd miss Springsteen. So I think what we all hear from you, focus, vision, responsibility, accountability, mentorship, creativity, empathy, love, passion, and again, that R word, responsibility, all of which adds up to leadership. Thanks to the three of you for your leadership. Thanks to everyone here for your leadership and your support.
So if there's anybody in this room who this is their first exposure to these conversations and these men and women, when Prince Harry tells a story of how he came back from the Warrior Games in the United States, determined to do something, do you get it now? I mean, these are extraordinary people. Your Royal Highness, I know that you have appreciated the experiences of our panelists so far, and I'm sure you feel renewed in your commitment to the men and women and their role in healing. We thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. There is so much going on in this city right now and so much that will be going on over the next week. We don't want to monopolize your time. We're going to take a break, return at 10:30, get a little more caffeine in us. But before anybody leaves, please stand for the departure of His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales. Let's coffee up.